All right, let's call this meeting to order then. This is the November the 16th meeting of the Equality Garden Club. This is our annual meeting, and I want to welcome everybody who's attending it. Excuse me. I hope that everybody is comfortable right now because we're going to have quite a little meeting here. I'm looking forward to this presentation as with a lot of enthusiasm. I think we're going to really enjoy this one. But first, I have to go and tell us what our agenda is here. After my opening remarks, we're going to have the election of the executive board, which will be conducted by our Vice President of Membership, Linda Gordon. And then after we've seen that poll come up, then she'll explain to you the details on that. Then you will have the speakers. We'll have Carl Shearer introducing our speaker for the evening. And excuse me, and then he will take over. And after he finishes his presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. So those people who are sure to have a lot of questions, this is a fascinating woman, a pioneer in the true sense of the word. And then Carl will be coming back on after the question and answer. He'll be telling us about what the future programs we'll be having. We're always like to keep you informed of the future. And then we'll have the surprise election results. Linda will be back to give us that. And then I'll come back to say hello to you and wish you all well. All right. At any rate, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's concerned about not being able to have our regular meetings, but as is may, we've been able to do these presentations. And so we're pleased about that, right? Excuse me, I'd like to go through the instructions to make sure. I know a number of you already know this, but there are always going to be some new people who aren't totally familiar with it, right? And so we'll do the tips. We'll do these tips in the remarks. I'd like you to remember to keep your audio on mute at all times because otherwise it interrupts the flow of everything going on. And also you want to make sure that your video cameras are turned off, okay? If you experience a short time lag, which happens sometimes, it is not your fault. You have not lost connection. It's a glitch. We're in the background here working. We'll be working on it and bringing it to you as quickly as possible. Now, if you're joining us on Zoom, right, you can post your questions through the chat button, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Be careful that you can address yourself to an individual or you can address yourself to everyone. So be careful who you're addressing, okay? If you get disconnected and you're on Zoom, you can rejoin us very simply. Just sign back on as you did originally, and you'll come back in with no question. There may be a slight delay if we don't notice that you're asking to be readmitted, but just be patient. We'll get you right back on. Excuse me. If you're joining us on Facebook live, we'd like you to post your comments and your questions on the video. And we'd also like you to share that video so that others can also join, all right? We have two moderators going on assisting in the audience. On the Zoom, Carl Scherer will be assisting and collecting questions which are submitted on that platform. And on Facebook, Mario Rios will be assisting and collecting questions that are presented on that platform. So, and they will then inform the presenter what questions are being asked, okay? I'd like to remind all of you one thing. We are being recorded, right? And this meeting is being archived, which is great. And that means that you'll be able to review the presentation by going to our website, equalitygardenclub.com. Excuse me. Just another word, right? As I said before, I really am very sorry we don't have our live meetings. It's very difficult. And I especially miss the lively plant auctions that we used to have every meeting. They were really a lot of fun. But we've been able to keep up with these presentations. One thing we have to do, which we don't normally have to do, this is our annual meeting. We are required to have an election of our officers, our executive board. And in order to vote, I have to remind people that you must be a member in good standing. And you can only do it, you can only participate in this poll if you're on the Zoom platform. So if you're on Facebook and you can get onto the Zoom platform as a member, I suggest you do that if you want to have your vote counted. I'm now going to introduce our Vice President of Membership, Linda Gordon, and she will give you the details on how this election is going to run. Linda, it's all yours.
Thank you, Van, and hi to all you members and guests, and thank you for joining us tonight. I too wish we could be at Hagen Park with our plant raffle and refreshments, but the good thing about Zoom is you can do it in your jammies with a glass of wine. So anyway, hopefully we'll be able to get back over to Hagen in the new year. We'll let you know as soon as we get any kind of confirmation from Wilton Manors. So tonight we're having our very first Zoom election. And according to the new bylaws we passed in September, the board members elected tonight will serve a 2-year term. Since no one submitted any names for any of the positions, each one of the candidates is running unopposed. So why are we having an election, right? We have to. Anyway, the only change in the slate is Paul Durbin will be replacing Carl Scherer as president of programming. So now what you need to do, hopefully the poll will come up on your screen. Members need to, there it is. Members need to answer yes or no to each of the names in the poll on your screen. We'll tabulate your votes and announce the board members at the end of Victor's presentation. If you get to the end of the poll and your submit button is grayed out, you probably skipped a name. You must answer yes or no to each name in order to submit your vote. If you have any problems, go into chat and one of our producers will try and help you. No guarantees there, but we're going to certainly try. So with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Carl to introduce tonight's guest speaker, and I'll see you all after the presentation with the results. Carl, it's all yours.
Thank you, Linda. Members and guests, welcome. Tonight, we're fortunate to have Victor Lazzari with us. Victor presented to us a few years back. Victor is a landscape designer originally from the hilly farm country of Maryland. A Florida resident since 2007, Victor holds a BA in landscape design from the University of Maryland, an MA in landscape architecture from FIU, a master's certificate in agroecology from FIU. His small company, JungleGymFL, offers landscape design, consultation, and project management services all over the Tri-County area. Victor specializes in English-inspired plantings that thrive in the challenging climate of South Florida, and is obsessively passionate about, in particular, about roses. He is currently writing and self-publishing a book on the art and science of growing roses in South Florida. Victor currently resides in Oakland Park with his partner, Brian, and their 2 kids, Teddy, a young tuxedo kitten with dreams of world domination, and Tyson, a black lab with an unhealthy fixation on tennis balls. Tonight's topic is Gertrude Jekyll and the arts and crafts movement. Gertrude Jekyll was a famous landscape designer in Victorian England who single-handedly launched the arts and crafts movement in landscape architecture, which raised the concept of cottage gardening to both a fine art and a recognized form of landscape architecture forever after. This presentation will explore her life, her work, and how the design principles she inaugurated can be applied to South Florida gardens. With that, I am pleased to turn this over to Victor Lazzari. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you everyone who could make it tonight. As Carl said, my name is Victor Lazzari, and for the last little while, I've been a landscape and garden designer. I first read about Gertrude Jekyll when I was probably 14 or 15 years old. And I turned 40 next year. So this is a woman that I've literally been reading and researching and studying for 25 years now. And she has greatly influenced my own career as a, as a landscape designer. I apologize to everybody in advance. I have been very congested for the past couple weeks. So I'm gonna do my best to try to enunciate clearly, but bear with me, please. And let's see, I've only done one Zoom presentation before. It went well. People who know me know that I'm not the most computer literate person in the world. I'm gonna do my best to make sure that I can get this going. So let's see, share screen. Let's see, I have an error message saying I can't share the screen.
Ooh.
1 second.
Gotcha. Are you a host? Oh, you need to be a host.
Oh.
Oh, we need to make you a host.
Oh, okay, that would explain that.
That would help.
You should be able to now.
Okay, let's try again. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Let's do full screen. All right, so like I was saying, Gertrude Jekyll is a woman that I've studied for over 20 years now, and I just have so much esteem and respect for her, not just because of her contributions to landscape and garden design, but she was just really a remarkable woman in all respects, and we'll kind of review that together during the presentation. So without further ado, Gertrude Jekyll and the Arts and Crafts Movement. The presentation is going to focus on 6 things. We're going to start with some biographic information on Gertrude herself. We'll talk about some of the things that influenced her work, some of the specific concepts behind her work, a couple of projects that she did over in England. Of course, she's British. But then sections 5 and 6 are what I think the most important to tonight's presentation, how her design principles apply to South Florida, since that's where we all are. And number 6, the most fun, specific South Florida plants that we can use to get the Gertrude Jekyll look. All right, so who was Gertrude Jekyll? She was a garden designer during the Victorian and Edwardian periods of British history. So that's going to be the last half of the 1800s and then the first 20 or so years of the 1900s. Born in 1843, died in 1932, so she lived a pretty long life. Today, she's considered the leading lady of the arts and crafts movement in landscape and garden design. This next slide, when I used to do this presentation in real life prior to the pandemic, I like to keep the slide in the presentation because it kind of, anybody in the audience that I was already losing, it would kind of wake them up. I always thought that when I saw my first picture of Gertrude, I thought that she kind of looked like a cross between Super Nanny and Mrs. Doubtfire. So just a little bit of humor to wake up any audience members that might be snoozing already. All right, but in all seriousness, Gertrude, she was just such an awesome lady, a true Renaissance woman in every sense of the word. Not only was she not just a garden designer, but she actually didn't even start out as one in her career. She actually went to school at the age of 18 to become a painter. And in addition to painting, any single fine art, like any and every fine art that you could possibly think of, not only could Gertrude do it, but she could do it really well. So in addition to painting, writing, photography, weaving, sewing, jewelry making, woodworking, metalworking. In her house, which we'll see a little bit later, she actually carved the wood doors to her own wine cellar. So she was just a true Renaissance woman in terms of every fine art you can possibly think of. So why did she switch from painting to garden design? A little bit of a tragic story with a silver lining. When she was in her 40s, so this is the 1880s, she sadly began to go blind. This is what prompted her to switch focus in her career from painting and the visual arts to landscape and garden design. She needed a new medium to work with that was larger in scale than paints or jewelry or woodworking or weaving. And she realized what that medium was Mother Nature. So trees and plants and flowers. Because her vision, because she was becoming more and more nearsighted, things just appeared to her as blurs of color. She actually figured out an ingenious way to make her handicap work to her advantage. And we're gonna see that shortly. So what were some of the things that influenced her work? Today, again, her movement is called the Arts and Crafts Movement. Different people who have read and studied Gertrude may have different opinions on what influenced her work. In my opinion, there were three big things. The first is the Victorian era itself, the era in which she lived and worked. The second thing is Impressionism, which is a new art movement that sweeps through Europe during her lifetime. And the third is an Irish gardener by the name of William Robinson. So the Victorian era, of course, is named for Queen Victoria. It lasted from the 1840s right up until the Queen's death in 1900. This is a period in British history where industrialization is really taking hold of the country, and we see the proliferation of factories for the first time. The proliferation of industry and factories was great in many respects, but one of the sort of negatives of it was for the first time in European history, the people saw the proliferation of really cheap and boring manufactured goods, which is something that we still have today, a legacy of the industrial period. The attitude of the cheap and the easy and the thoughtless and the mass-produced spills over into all aspects of British life, including landscape and garden design. So a lot of people, when they hear the words Victorian garden design, they think of something really dreamy and romantic and flowery. That's true thanks to Gertrude. Before she started practicing landscape and garden design, Victorian gardens were actually kind of boring and really nothing to write home about. They were mostly what you see in the picture here, which is called a parterre garden. Parterre is a French word, and it simply refers to any low hedge that's clipped into a formal geometric pattern on the ground. They're very rigid and very symmetrical. So if you see the image here, if you slice it down the middle, one half is the mirror image of the other half. That's kind of the calling card of the parterre. It has perfect axial symmetry. In addition to the parterre gardens, the big thing in Victorian garden design was also something called carpet bedding. Carpet bedding is the use of a single type and color of flower on the ground to create basically just a color, a pattern of color. Sometimes with a parterre, sometimes not. And we'll see a picture of that here on the next slide. So you can see that this is a pretty good example of Victorian carpet bedding where flowers are just used to create blocks of color on the ground. I can't emphasize enough, Gertrude hated Victorian carpet bedding. She absolutely despised it. And the reason was because she felt that it robbed flowers of their natural beauty. You can see another example of carpet bedding here. And really, her opinion, which I fully agree with, is carpet bedding really reduces flowers to nothing more than blocks of color on the ground. And Gertrude didn't like that because she really felt that each and every type of flower should stand out artistically through its own individuality. So that was one of the first things that influenced her work. Second is Impressionism. Impressionism is an art movement that began in France in the 1870s, named for Claude Monet's painting Impression Sunrise, which you can see on this slide here. Impressionism is a form of art that emphasizes very visible brushstrokes of color, and it's really almost kind of the opposite of that Victorian stiffness and formality that we see with the parterre gardens and the carpet beds. You know, they're stiff and formal and symmetrical and kind of boring, and Impressionism is sort of the opposite of that, very loose and very free-flowing. Gertrude was a huge fan of Impressionism, and we'll see on this slide here, she actually, prior to her curtailing her career in painting, she actually made a couple of paintings in the style. So these are two of her Impressionist paintings. Neither of them has titles, so they're just called Untitled Jekyll painting. And the third influence, William Robinson. He is an Irish gardener who lived during roughly the same years that Gertrude lived. And like Gertrude, Robinson despised the Victorian carpet beds and the parterre gardens. Robinson is credited with creating what are called the first mixed borders. And I'll just pause for a minute here. For those who don't know, a border is simply the British word for flower bed. So what we would call a flower bed or a flower garden here in in North America, British call a border. So just so everybody's clear on the terminology. So he created the first mixed borders, which were these long beds where different types and heights of flowers were used to create really picturesque effects. Gertrude would strongly follow his example when she began designing gardens of her own. So here you can see an example of a Robinson mixed border, and the picture really just speaks for itself. You have, whoops, what is this? Get rid of that. Okay, so here you can see that in the mixed border concept, you have dozens of different types of flowers that are used in a really artistic combination. Really, it's quite the polar opposite of the Victorian carpet beds, which are very short and boring. This is definitely not short. It has a lot of height to it, and lots of variations in color and texture. And here we go. So this slide, I think, really illustrates that point. You can see the vast difference between carpet bedding, which again is the sort of original Victorian garden design, versus the mixed border, which is later Victorian garden design. And really, again, the picture speaks for itself. You can see that the carpet bed garden on the left is really flat and rather dull and boring, has perfect axial symmetry. You can slice it down the middle. One half is the mirror image of the other half. And it really only works as a pattern or a block of color. In the mixed border, on the other hand, we have all these different variations in color and height and texture and opacity. You can see some of the flowers on the right side are really dense. Some of them are more open and wispy. So again, really the polar opposite of carpet bedding. All right, so concepts. Gertrude's vision, which again is called the Arts and Crafts Movement in landscape architecture, landscape design, is really a synthesis of those three influences. So first, we're pushing back against Victorianism, that idea of the cheap and the boring and the easily manufactured, specifically carpet bedding. Secondly, we're demonstrating an impressionist style of artwork, but we're using plants instead of paints. And third, we are embracing and highlighting the individual beauty of each flower, as William Robinson's mixed border method kind of demonstrated. Now, the movement, the arts and crafts movement, really takes off when Gertrude very fortuitously teams up with a very famous man that probably most of us have heard of. That man is Sir Edwin Lutyens. And here is Sir Edwin Lutyens. He is considered the leading British architect of the 20th century, certainly the first half of the 20th century, if not the whole century itself. He had an amazing career and was just a seminal architect in England and abroad. He teamed up with Gertrude early in his career, and together they were the pair that really led the arts and crafts movement in landscape architecture. Typically, he would design a house or another structure, another building rather, and then she would step in and design the gardens and the landscaping around that building or structure. So an arts and crafts style garden or landscape is going to be, at its core, in my opinion, kind of like the perfect yin yang, a blend of the formal with the informal, the masculine with the feminine, and the soft with the hard. It reflected a lot of elements of previous landscape architecture movements, such as the Renaissance, the Baroque, the Romantic, and the picturesque. Lutyens would typically design these really amazing mansions that had very prominent outdoor terraces and patios and stairways and pergolas. Gertrude would then step in and install these amazing flower borders, flower gardens that would soften all of those hardscape features. And here you can see a typical Lutyens house. We have a really prominent outdoor terrace with these terrace steps, these really grand curving steps that kind of flow off of it. Very formal, very, very strong, very kind of impactful architecture. All of this would later be softened by Gertrude's plantings, which we'll see in a moment. So Gertrude's flower borders are really kind of the hallmark, the meat and potatoes of the arts and crafts movement. She took Robinson's idea for the mixed border and just totally ran with it and raised it to just really an art form, a state of elegance, but also meticulous planning. Again, remember that this is a woman that's going blind and she can only see things as blurs. So her idea was to use that handicap to her advantage and create what she called living impressionist paintings. And now I'm going to pause for a minute. When I've done this presentation in real life before, typically the slide is on a big screen, and it's sort of hard to demonstrate what I'm about to have everyone do. But now that we're all on smaller computers and devices, this is actually perfect. So the pandemic has had a little bit of a silver lining. I want everyone right now looking at the slide to squint your eyes as you look at the flower garden. So as you do that, this is what Gertrude saw. So she saw all these flowers as blurs and brushstrokes of color, and that's exactly the effect that she wanted other people to have in her garden designing. So she wanted things to appear not as individual flowers here and there, or as blocks of color, but as really beautiful sweeping brushstrokes of color that would highlight the individual beauty of each flower. So again, since we're on small devices, it's a perfect opportunity to actually try that in real life, to squint and sort of see the garden the way that Gertrude herself would have seen it. All right, so we talked about Lutyens and how he would design these really prominent and very kind of stern and very hard and masculine hardscape features. Here we can kind of see that illustrated in action. So this image right here on the slide is a classic arts and crafts style garden. So you can see, it's actually hard to see, which we'll delve into in a minute. We have a very prominent stone wall, this terraced land. That wall is probably about 5 or 6 feet tall. It's hard to see because it's purposely obscured, but there's a stairway that cuts through the wall, leads up to a large pathway on the upper level of the terrace with a really prominent pergola overhead. But everything's kind of hard to see. That's not an accident. That's actually purely intentional. So the idea was to take these really masculine and strong and forceful hardscape features, but to soften them, to use all these really painterly and really bountiful plants and flower combinations to make it seem very soft. And again, to make it feel like brushstrokes of color in sort of like a living painting. Again, so this picture here on the slide is kind of a classic example of a true arts and crafts style garden. And once more, we want to contrast early Victorian gardening with the later Victorian. So why do we call it the arts and crafts style movement? Those words were not just pulled out of a hat. They're actually quite intentional. It is the craftsmanship, the very heavy level of planning that goes into a Gertrude Jekyll style garden. That's what sets it apart from the carpet beds in particular, but also previous landscape architecture movements, that really meticulous level of planning and craftsmanship. So you can again see the sort of night and day difference between these two gardens here, the carpet bed on the left and then the Gertrude Jekyll garden on the right. Now you might look at the image on the right and say, that looks so simple. You're just throwing things here and there. How hard can that be? It might look effortless, but in actuality, this garden required probably weeks or even months of planning for it to look like that. And we're going to look at those steps right now. So in Gertrude's, in her borders, her flower gardens, every single aspect of every single flower is considered. So the big one, of course, is the color of the flower, but in addition to that, the shape of the flower, the overall height of the plant, the texture of the leaf, the opacity of the plant. Is it really wispy and sort of see-through? Is it really thick and dense? What is the season of bloom? The objective is to create, again, this very craftsmanship, well-crafted, artistic floral display in which all the flowers show off their individual style of beauty because they're being complemented by everything else around it. In fact, to give you an idea of the level of meticulous, very, very careful planning of these gardens, not only should each plant look good next to its neighbors when they're flowering, everything should look good next to the plants around it when it's not in flower. So not only are you considering the plant when it is flowering, but you're considering it when it's not flowering. That's how meticulous these gardens are. So even though they look effortless, they're not effortless at all. Gertrude is also credited with something that landscape designers like myself are using today in the 21st century. She began what is known as drift planting, which is simply, as the name implies, you're planting things in long drifts of one type of plant, rather than like, a single daisy here and a single daisy there. Using the drift planting method, which you can see in this plan view drawing here. And by the way, this is an actual Gertrude Jekyll drawing. So she actually drew what you're seeing here. She drew it, labeled it, and colored it. This makes each type of flower look even more like a brushstroke of color. And again, if people want to pause on the slide for a minute and just kind of squint your eyes, you can see that it really does look or begin to look like brushstrokes of color in a painting, which of course is the effect that we're going for. And here we have two other drawings. You can see in the drawing on the left, this section perspective, and another plan view drawing on the right. Both of them, the way that the plants are drawn and arranged, again, they look like brushstrokes of color to sort of accomplish the goal of creating a living Impressionist painting. And here we can see a couple examples, a couple of real life examples, excuse me, of the drift planting method. Notice how in each of these pictures, the flowers are planted in these really long, graceful, weaving drifts of, like in the picture of the right, you have some blue irises here, and then some more here, and then some more over here. And then you have these sweeping masses of white daisies kind of flowing throughout the whole thing. And then in the image on the right, on these really prominent stone steps, you have the same thing. You have a silver plant here, and then a chartreuse plant here, and everything's sort of weaving in and out of each other. That's kind of one of the goals or design methodologies of the arts and crafts style of gardening, is to plant things in these drifts that sort of carry your eye through what is really supposed to be sort of like a living impressionist painting. All right, so we remember that Gertrude started out as a painter. She was an absolute whiz when it came to creating color combinations. She would, remember, this is what she's doing for a living. She's making money by designing landscapes and gardens for people. So she would spend weeks just perfecting the color scheme of a garden before she even picked out the plants or put anything in the ground. Thanks to her background in the visual arts, she had a keen understanding of how colors do three things. The first is how an individual color gives an individual effect. The second is how those effects associate with one another. And the third is how those associations are interpreted by or affect people who are viewing the garden. There's tons of color principles that we can talk about. And I also want to just throw out the disclaimer that the principles I'm going to delve into in a minute, this is related to landscape and garden design, not necessarily, say, fashion design, which I know has a whole other list of color rules. So we're talking about just landscapes and gardens. But that being said, even within the scope of landscaping, there's tons of color principles we could talk about, but in the interest of not having a 5-hour presentation, we're going to focus on just 4 for tonight, and those 4 are contrast, harmonies, whites, and grays. All right, so contrast. For those who don't know, a contrast is simply any 2 directly opposite colors on the color wheel. So we have our handy dandy color wheel right here. Any 2 opposites are going to be a contrast. So yellow, the direct opposite is purple. So these 2 right here where the cursor is going is going to be a contrast. Same with blue, purple, and yellow, orange. Same with blue and orange, and so on and so forth. Contrasts are wonderful because they give really nice focal points in a garden or a landscape, and they sort of relieve any monotony that's going on. They can actually be almost exhilarating to look at. The problem with a contrast is that if it's overdone, too much of it actually becomes unsettling, and instead of pleasing the human eye, it actually kind of assaults it. So Gertrude understands this, and she realized that one of the best ways to use contrast in a garden is to use contrasting colors at contrasting values. Excuse me. So we can see in the picture here, we have color contrast. We have yellow and purple. So again, referring to our color wheel, that makes a contrast. But here's the thing. The purple is really strong. The yellow is really soft. So those are contrasting colors at contrasting values. We could just as easily do the opposite and get the same effect. We could have a really, really strong yellow with a really, really pale lavender, and that would be the same concept of contrasting colors at contrasting values. That's going to be a little bit more palatable to the human eye than if you have really full value contrast, like a really strong yellow and a really strong purple over and over and over. So again, contrasting colors at contrasting values. Next, we come to harmonies. Harmonies are simply any colors that lie between 2 of the 3 primary colors on the color wheel. So for those who don't know, the 3 primaries are red, yellow, and blue. So harmonies are going to be any of the colors that lie between 2 of the primaries. So if we look between red and blue, blue, purple, purple, whoops, let me go back. Where did I go? Here we go. So we have blue, purple, purple, and red, purple. These 3 colors here constitute a harmony because they're the colors between red and blue, the 2 primaries. Harmonies are automatically pleasing to the human eye because the colors very obviously have a strong relationship with one another. You can see the flowers on the slide here. This is a flower called phlox. All of these colors are obviously related to one another, so they're very harmonious. They look good together. The problem with harmonies is actually the exact opposite problem of contrast. Too much contrast is upsetting to the human eye. too much harmony is very boring to the human eye. So it kind of, you sort of lose interest after a while. So again, Gertrude understands this. What she would typically do is use a lot of harmonies in the middle of like a long landscape or flower bed or what have you. But then she would punctuate it with a few carefully chosen contrasts here and there to relieve the potential boredom. Okay, third principle is white. In the gardening world, white is, it's kind of an oddball because it works in two really different ways. When we pair white next to really strong or really dark full value colors, it becomes a very strong contrast. So you can see in the picture here on the top, we have a really strong red rose, whoops, and a really strong yellow daisy, and then a white daisy in between. We can see there's an obvious really strong contrast going on. But when white is combined with lighter colors, especially the pales and the pastels, it appears really harmonious. You can see in the picture on the bottom, we have a very harmonious blend of lavender and blue and mauve daisies. And then you have some white daisies throw in, and they appear to kind of fit right in. So again, Gertrude remembered that too much contrast is a bad thing. So she tended to use white a little bit more sparingly with really dark or strong colors. She used it much more liberally next to the pales and the pastels. All right, and I accidentally jumped ahead to this one. The fourth principle is gray, and I like to say hallelujah for gray. Like seriously, gray is friggin' awesome. This is gonna be your great moderator in the color world. Gray in gardening is typically in the form of plants that have gray leaves, since there's not really a whole lot of flowers that have gray petals, but gray is wonderful. First is gray combines very effortlessly with harmonies, and especially pale harmonies. So you can see the picture here on the top, we have sort of like an off-white flower and like sort of a light yellow flower. The gray leaf plant in the middle, which is called Artemisia, it just kind of blends like effortlessly. It looks right at home with these two pale colors. So that's the first thing about gray that's wonderful. Second thing is gray really moderates the full value color contrast. So this is another thing we can do on our screens at home. This picture on the bottom, I want everyone to take your hand, cover up the plants with the gray leaves with your hand, and you can see we have a really strong red, a really strong yellow, and a really strong blue violet. We have a lot of really intense contrast going on. And you can imagine that if you repeated this for 20 or 30 feet in a garden, it might be a little upsetting. Take your hand away. The minute you have gray put next to those really strong color contrasts, the contrast is still there, but it's greatly softened. So because of those two principles, combining effortlessly with the harmonies and moderating the contrast, gray is the plant that's going to allow for total cohesion of the garden. And I'll give, since I am a professional garden designer myself, I'm going to give everyone at home a free tip. Frequently, I'm engaged to do a consultation for a client where they'll bring me over their house and they'll say, Victor, I have these plants that I really like and I picked them out, but I'm not sure how to arrange them in my front yard or backyard. What do I do? And I say, just get something gray. Get, like a couple flats of Dusty Miller, or get some silver buttonwood, or get some Texas sage, anything that has silvery or gray leaves, and that will help those other colors to look good together. So again, gray is going to be your best friend in the landscape because it's going to moderate everything else around it. And in fact, Gertrude liked plants that had gray leaves so much that gardens that were kind of gray in tone or had a lot of gray leaf plants, that actually became sort of her signature look, which we'll see in a couple of her projects. So we're going to look at those right now, a couple of specific projects that she did. The first is Munstead Wood. This is in Surrey in England. And this is not only Gertrude's house, but it's also her show garden. So this is the house that she lived in for her whole adult life up until her death. And I also want to take just another brief minute to say that I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation how much I love and esteem Gertrude for reasons beyond her being a garden designer, since I am one myself. I want everyone to remember that this is in the late 1800s, when this is a time in human history where the idea of a single woman doing anything on her own is not really looked upon by most of society. Women in this period in history are kind of expected to marry and then basically do what their husbands tell them to do. Gertrude was single her whole life, ran her own business, lived in a mansion, and did everything on her own while going blind. So I want everyone to just think about that for a second. This is over 100 years ago in the past. It's probably, if I could like distill down to sort of like one little sentence why I have so much respect for Gertrude, it's probably that. When you think about what she was doing when she was doing it, it's really kind of amazing. Anyway, so back to this slide though. So Munstead Wood was where she lived and where she practiced, and it was also where she brought clients over to showcase her work. This was a collaboration between her and Edwin Lutyens, the architect mentioned earlier. So Lutyens designed the house, and then Gertrude designed all the landscaping and gardening around it. Unfortunately, Munstead Wood is a private residence now, so photos and tours are really hard to come by. But we do have a couple of images, and we'll look at those. This is the plan of Munstead Wood, drawn by Gertrude herself. And you can kind of see the arts and crafts sort of spirit of the design. So we have elements that are very formal and geometric, specifically the footprint of the house, and then the terraces coming off of the house, and then this sort of rigid assortment of formal pathways coming off of the terrace. But then everything is really softened by her plantings. So again, arts and crafts style gardening is going to be that marriage of the formal and the informal, the masculine and the feminine, the hardscape and the softscape. And here we can see a close-up of the drift planting scheme at Munstead Wood. And again, you can sort of see the idea of the drift planting a little bit closer up. And here's a real-life image of the Munstead Wood gardens today, a little bit pixelated, I apologize. This is one of the gardens there called the Autumn Garden, since it's mostly fall blooming flowers. And then this is really the meat and potatoes of Munstead Wood. This is the main flower border. This area here was Gertrude's pride and joy. It took her something like 4 months just to design this one garden. And it's hard to see in this image, but these flower beds are actually over 200 feet long and almost 20 feet wide. So it's actually quite a huge space. And again, you can see the spirit of this arts and crafts style garden. We have this very formal and very kind of strong and almost masculine, if you will, formal walkway. This walkway is probably about 10 feet wide. A central fountain here that's quite large in scale, bracketed by these 2 topiaries, and then it's backed by this decorative stone wall feature back here. So again, this is another instance where if you use your hands and put them up on the screen, if you cover up the flower gardens, you can see that what we're presented with is really, let me get the cursor out of the way. It's really kind of very rigid and hard, but then the minute you take your hands away and you can see the flowers, the symmetry and the formality of the garden is there, but it's all really, really softened. And again, that's kind of the hallmark of an arts and crafts style garden. The other project we'll look at is Hestercombe House. This is in Somerset, and this is another collaboration between Gertrude and Edwin Lutyens. This was originally built as a private residence, but now kind of nice, it's actually a public building, so tours are easy to come by here as opposed to Munstead Wood, where they're almost impossible. This right here is what I consider to be the nicest part of the garden at Hestercombe House. This is a terrace. So the house itself is kind of up back here in this upper corner, you can't see it, but then there's this really beautiful, very prominent terrace, and then these really kind of dramatic stone steps that come down off of it. And again, you can use your hands, cover up the plants, and you can kind of see that the effect you get is really sort of hard and bold. But then the minute you take your hands away and you see the plantings, the structure and the boldness remains, but it's really softened by the plantings, especially the white climbing roses that you can see sort of meandering up the wall and up the stairs, which I just think is like something out of a dream. I think it's amazing. And then another image of Hestercombe House. And this one you can just kind of see the drift planting sort of methodology in real life again. So notice how the flowers, the different types of flowers, excuse me, are planted in drifts of one another that sort of weave in and out of each other, excuse me, and make it seem like a living Impressionist painting, which of course is what Gertrude wants to accomplish. All right, so how does everything I've just talked about apply to South Florida, if at all? You may at first glance say that it doesn't, because the climate of South Florida is vastly different than England or Northern Europe. And those things are true. But in my opinion, as a landscape designer, the differences are not really so much the climate as much as other things, specifically 3 other things that I've sort of honed in on over the years. The first is the texture of foliage of plants here in South Florida. The second is seasonality, or lack of it. And the third is the overall size and density of plants. And we're going to look at each of these one at a time. All right, foliage texture. We all know that the commonly used plants here in South Florida are tropical, since we're a tropical climate. Makes perfect sense. Sort of the essence of a tropical plant is something that has like a really large, bold leaf. So think like your elephant ears, your alocasias, most of the palms, cordylines, crotons, bromeliads, all those things that have really, really big leaves. That sort of oversized foliage creates that really iconic tropical feel. Now, I'm not saying to not use these plants at all. Of course we should, since they're the plants that we have here. The main issue is when these plants are overused. So I have these two images here. I'm hoping that neither of these images is anyone's garden that is in attendance at the audience right now. If it is your garden, I apologize, no harm intended. But you can see each of these gardens is, it's perfectly lovely, but there's nothing particularly soft feeling about either of them. And in fact, I personally get kind of a really sort of aggressive feel when I look at these gardens because there's just so much boldness and there's no softness going on. So again, too many bold plants are going to make a garden feel sort of hard and aggressive. A Gertrude Jekyll or an arts and crafts style garden is really going to feel a little bit more light and more soft. All right, issue number 2 is seasonality. Again, because we're a tropical climate, a lot of our plants don't really undergo any seasonal changes. They create what I kind of call these foliage landscapes, which you can see here. Again, I hope this is no one's house. If so, I apologize. But you can see the plants here. We have some tea plants, we have some dracaenas, a lot of crotons, looks like gold mound duranta and a couple of agaves. None of these plants really change throughout the year. So it doesn't matter if it's January or June or November, this landscape is going to pretty much look as it is right now in this picture, all 12 months of the year. That lack of seasonality is something that Gertrude would probably not be crazy about because she liked the fact that that some plants underwent seasonal changes so that a garden grew and developed over time, that it wasn't unchanged. It was actually something very changeable. And third, overall size and density. And I love to pick on poor little Green Island ficus because it's probably the worst offender of what I'm about to mention. So when I think that everyone here who has ever been to a nursery, we walk into a nursery and we see Green Island ficus, in its little 1 gallon pot, and we're like, oh, what a cute little plant. And then about 2 or 3 years later, we have the image on the bottom. So that's probably the single biggest problem with a lot of South Florida plants is that they're kind of cute and open and airy looking when they're young, but then they very quickly mature into these huge, very dense blocks of green. Which are then typically sheared into geometry. So essentially you're sort of creating like a large shapeless parterre garden, which if Gertrude were alive today, she wouldn't be crazy about that because remember, she doesn't really like that look. So how can we create an arts and crafts style garden in South Florida? We just want to work against those 3 stereotypes that I talked about. So first, we want to avoid overdoing the bold textured tropicals. And I want to explain that a little bit further. I am not in any way suggesting to not use any tropicals at all. And in fact, Gertrude herself, she was a huge fan of tropicals. In her gardens, some of the commonly used plants were, she used a lot of agaves, she used a ton of yuccas. She would use cannas and alocasias and even heliconias. Now, because it was a cold climate, England, typically these plants were put out in April or May, and then with the first frost in autumn, they were moved to her greenhouse for the winter. But she used a lot of bold textured tropicals. She just used them sparingly. So she made an effort to focus on plants that were a little bit more fine textured to sort of balance out all those really bold textures. So that's number 1. Secondly, look for seasonality in your plant choices. There's a lot of plants that undergo seasonal changes. The one that comes to my mind the most easily is beautyberry, Calicarpa. So for those who have used this plant or are familiar with it, it has small pink flowers in the spring, and then over summer and into autumn, this time of year, really, those flowers turn into really metallic, sort of violet magenta berries. Gertrude really liked stuff like that. She liked things that went through seasonal changes. So as you're designing your landscape or your garden, sort of look for those things. Don't necessarily design with the assumption that your garden must look exactly the way it looks all 12 months of the year with no changes. So sort of embrace those changes whenever you can. And third, incorporate things that are a little bit more airy and translucent. Try to avoid overusing things like Greenland ficus or Duranta or cocoa plum or other things that just really turn into like these very dense sort of monolithic shrubs. Try to focus on herbaceous materials, annuals and perennials for the majority of the palette that you're using for your garden design. A few additional tips really quick. Focus on our cool season because that's by far when you're going to get the most choices for creating something that looks like an arts and crafts style garden. The nice thing about the South Florida cool season is, as we know, it's cool, but it's really not cold. So what that means is you can use all of the cool season flowers, but you can use pretty much all of the hot season flowers too, because our cool season is still relatively warm when, say, compared with the rest of the country. So October through May is when you're going to have the most choices to make a really cool garden. Also, spend time amending your soil. When I was in college in Maryland, which is where I'm from, I worked at a nursery called the Benke Nursery Company, which was like sort of the really famous nursery chain out in that part of the country. They had a famous saying on their front door, which said, never put a $20 plant in a 50-cent hole. And what that means in plain parlance is we all know that plants are not cheap. They can quickly add up. So it makes sense to spend the time amending your soil prior to planting, especially since the soils here in South Florida tend to be so crappy to start with. So take the time to add compost and topsoil. Composted horse manure is wonderful. Organic fertilizers, take the time to do that before you plant anything. Also, ornamental grasses are wonderful, especially for helping to neutralize some of those plants that I mentioned earlier, the green island ficuses and so forth. And last but not least, remember your color wheel. And for those who are still not convinced, I'm going to take you on a brief photo slideshow of my own garden, me and my partner's garden in Oakland Park, which is my attempt to sort of emulate Gertrude's style here in South Florida. And these are all pictures that I took over the past year or so. And I'll just pause at each slide for a couple moments so everyone can sort of see and sort of take it on. I love this image in particular because the two salvias that I use, this purple one right here, and then the pink one, which we'll review in a little bit, they just make it look like so wispy and so diaphanous and feminine and blousy, and I think that Gertrude would really like this if she were alive to see it. These are some images, excuse me, of the front yard garden. A rose bush here with some phlox around it. This one right here is kind of nice because it illustrates that color principle I was talking about a little bit ago. So here we have a really, really strong purple and a really, really light yellow. And the contrast is moderated by all of the Dusty Miller that you can see planted here. So again, this is another one where if you take your hand and put it up to your screen, if you cover up the silver plant, then you can see we have a really strong contrast between the yellow and the purple. Take your hand away, the contrast is still there, but the silver greatly moderates it. As Carl mentioned when he was introducing me, I'm obsessively passionate about roses, and he said he read what I wrote, what I submitted to him in my bio, which was that at the time that I created this presentation, I was trying to self-publish a book on roses. I am actually going to take this opportunity to say that I am proud to announce that I actually have a publisher. The University of Florida accepted my proposal to write this book. So it is going to be published by an actual publisher, not myself. And the book should be available sometime late next year or early in 2022. Another image of the garden, the backyard garden. Again, you can see the use of silver plants, kind of moderate some of the other colors. More roses here. And you can see some New Guinean patience behind it. This is the image of our front yard, and I especially like this because I was really trying to accomplish that sort of true arts and crafts style garden, which is that marriage between the Lutyens features and the Gertrude Jekyll features. So you can see in this, I designed it all myself. So I purposely designed this. So the front door is kind of right here where the cursor is, and I'm sort of off center to the left side. But there is a very formal pathway here with a circular little roundabout, and then a bird bath, an antique bird bath in the middle, and then an arch at the end. But everything is really softened by these really billowing sort of plantings. And that was intentional on my part to sort of emulate that arts and crafts style garden of like that sort of yin yang of the formal and the informal. This is a close-up of the roses that are growing in the center area of the roundabout. So the path is kind of curving behind them. You can see a little bit of the bird bath here. Here's another image of the front yard. So the two paths right here are crisscrossing, and then the circle is right here where my cursor is encircling. And the color scheme that I wanted to do for the front yard was all yellows and blues. So I use a lot of blue salvias, a lot of the yellow ixora. So again, I'm using the tropical plants of South Florida. I'm just using them in a slightly different way than what you might normally see. Another image of the backyard. You can see in this one, sort of the idea of drift planting. You can see some of the yellow celosia here is then repeated over on this side over here. And it's hard to see, but there's also some here that's out of bloom, was out of bloom rather when this photo was taken. But again, the idea is that you're using one type of plant in these drifts that will sort of weave in and out of the sort of the scene that you're viewing. And a couple of bouquets of some of the flowers from the garden. All right, and we're gonna wrap up really quick. We're gonna breeze through some of these specific plants that we can use here in South Florida to get that Gertrude Jekyll arts and crafts style look for your own garden. So feel free, if you're not already, use your mobile device to take pictures if you want of these slides, or take notes however you see fit. Angelonia is going to be our first stop. I love Angelonia because I'm a huge fan of blue and purple flowers, and Angelonia is primarily in shades of blue and purple. Very tall and upright in its habit, which is nice since a lot of South Florida plants tend to be more spreading. This is one of the few verticals that we have. Really nice for giving vertical texture to a flower garden. Coreopsis. These are really easy to grow plants. You can typically find them at Lowe's or Home Depot pretty much any time of the year. The Uptick series in particular, I am in contact with, for those who don't know, Costa Farms is one of the biggest flower growers in North America. One of my really good friends works for them, and so he's always telling me what the newest and latest plants are that are doing well in their trials. They have a really big trial garden down in Miami. The Uptick series of Coreopsis has performed really, really well for Costa Farms. So this is one to look for. They're typically these kind of daisy-shaped flowers that are in shades of yellow and gold and bronze. They're a perennial. What I have found though is that they kind of struggle to be like a true perennial here in South Florida, meaning that they tend to only last for about a year or so. But each plant gives you so much color during that year of time that to me it's kind of worth it to put them in the ground, let them perform for about a year or so, and then if they start to peter out, just replace them. Texas sage it's called sage, but it's not edible. So people at home, please don't try to eat this. This is a shrub that you can see the picture kind of speaks for itself. Gray foliage, which as we remember from earlier, gray is going to be your moderator of the garden. So definitely a good one to use. This shrub is native to Texas, but it actually does very well in South Florida because it loves sandy alkaline soil, which we have pretty much everywhere. So as long as you give it a spot that has good drainage, this will do really, really well in South Florida. The Garvinea series of Gerbera daisy, these are absolute rock stars. I cannot say enough good things about Garvinea. I love these flowers, and whenever I see them, I just snatch them up from the garden center. Wonderful way to get like a true daisy-shaped flower in your South Florida garden. Garvineas are a type of Gerbera daisy, just like the Gerberas you get at the florist at Trader Joe's or Publix, but these are specifically bred for heat and humidity tolerance as garden plants. So the flowers are going to be a little bit smaller than the ones you get at the florist, but what they lack in size, they're going to make up for in performance. They come in tons of colors, red, orange, pink, white, various shades of magenta, and kind of like fuchsia. The colors tend to be a little bit bold, like you can see in the picture. It's almost like a neon pink. So definitely a plant to use. Just make sure that you sort of harmonize them carefully. And they're just like the florist Gerbera daisies. These are wonderful as cut flowers. So if you like to make bouquets for your house, definitely a good one to put in your garden. Gora is a quintessential Gertrude Jekyll flower. This is actually a plant that she used a lot over in England. This is a North American native from Louisiana, but it actually does very well in South Florida. And in fact, I had, they weren't really visible in the photos I showed just a moment ago. I had a ton of this in our Oakland Park garden, and mine did so well that I actually started to get little seedling plants sprouting up on the lawn. So I would just dig them up and replant them in other areas or give them to friends. But you can see the texture is just wonderful. It's very wispy and open, and the whole plant will just blow around in the wind whenever the wind blows. So really good for giving sort of an essence of movement to a garden. And the flowers are attractive to butterflies. So got a lot of pros there. White alder. This is probably one of the most underused flowers for our area. I've always wondered why I do not see this flower in more gardens. It is just another rock star for South Florida. It's got these really big open-faced flowers that are pale yellow, and you can see in the center of each flower is a little highlight of gold and purple. This is actually the white flowered version of the common Cuban buttercup. And for people who have grown Cuban buttercup, you know how easy and low maintenance it is. This is going to be that same performance, just with a slightly different color. And personally, I like this softer color better than the bright yellow of the Cuban buttercup. This is a little bit more appealing to me personally. It's just got such a classic English look to it that this is definitely something that you should include in your garden if you're trying to get that arts and crafts look. Very drought tolerant, and if it grows too tall, you can just trim it back and it'll reflush with flowers after you cut it back. Wheat celosia, this is another classic Gertrude Jekyll flower, really nice architectural plant. The color is another one of these really strong magenta pinks, so one to use, but just make sure that you harmonize it carefully if you're going to include it in your garden. And speaking of harmonies, the bandana series of lantana is another one of my personal favorites. This is an improved strain of the regular lantana chimera. One of the nice things about it is that this hybrid tends to be sterile. So this is something that you can comfortably use with the knowledge that it's not going to reproduce and cause sort of an invasive species problem in your area. And as I mentioned, it's one of the nice things about it, speaking of harmonies, is the fact that if you look closely, each individual cluster of flowers actually has its own built-in color harmony. So you can see these shades of pink and peach and yellowish gold all kind of harmonize really nicely with one another. So really, really cool for that reason alone, the sort of built-in color harmony. Chinese forget-me-not. This is another underused gem for our area. Probably the reason why it's underused is because you can only grow this one from packets of seeds. I've never seen transplants at any garden center, which is actually kind of a shame because the transplants, they transplant really well. So I've never understood why it's not grown by nurseries. But like I said earlier, blue and purple flowers tend to be my favorite colors in a garden. And you can see the color is just amazing. It's like a perfect sky blue. And these flowers, as you can see in the picture here, are very attractive to bees. So if you want to do something good for our little pollinator friends, Chinese forget-me-not is a really good one to include. Dwarf red crinum. I think a lot of people probably know the common Queen Emma crinum, which grows massive, easily 6 feet tall and wide, sometimes bigger. The dwarf red is a true dwarf. The specific name is called menehune, which is a Hawaiian word. This one only gets 2 feet tall and wide when it matures. So for someone who wants something a little bit smaller for their garden, this is a great one to look for. You can see the foliage is a beautiful deep burgundy color. I actually like this color better than the Queen Emma. And it produces these beautiful and very fragrant lily-shaped flowers off and on throughout the year. So if you can find this plant, it can be a little bit hard to find, but it's definitely worth it if you find it. Really good one to include. Queen Anne's lace, just like the Chinese forget-me-not, this is one that can only be grown from seed, but I think it's worth the effort. Again, this is another one where I think the photo just speaks for itself. Just beautiful and graceful and airy. Really does look like lace in the garden. It is a member of the dill family, so it's going to be really attractive to butterflies, especially swallowtails. So for people that are doing a butterfly garden, this is a great one to include. The only caveat is that Queen Anne's lace needs full sun. It doesn't tolerate any shade. So make sure that you have a sunny spot for it. Sweet William is a very classic English flower, and Gertrude used quite a bit of it in her garden designs. In South Florida, Sweet William generally doesn't perform very well, but the Amazon series that was recently developed by breeders actually exhibited a lot of good heat and humidity tolerance. I've planted this in my gardens in the past, and if you put it out around maybe November, usually you'll get nonstop color until probably April of the following year. And once a cluster of flowers is spent, you can just clip it off with scissors, and then usually more flowers will replace it. And they're really fragrant too. They're related to carnations, so they have that same kind of spicy carnation fragrance. Dusty Miller, I've mentioned a couple times previously. Again, gray foliage is going to be your best friend in the garden. It's going to kind of help everything else to cohese and gel together. Anecdotally, I've kind of found that the cut leaf types you can see in the left side of the picture here, these ones tend to last a little bit shorter here in South Florida. This large leaf type, if you can find it, tends to be harder to find in nurseries, but I found that this can last up to a year or so, especially if you give it like a shady position, like a partial shade spot in your garden. This one tends to be a little bit more longer lasting. Mexican cigar plant. This is a cufia, so it's actually related to the Mexican heather that probably a lot of us know, that short little plant that has the little pinkish purple flowers. So this is that same genus, but you can see it's not pink, it's actually kind of orangish yellow, and it's not short, it's actually quite tall. So a really cool plant for giving you some sort of tall architecture in the garden. Again, this is another one that has its own built-in color gradient. It goes from yellow to orange in one flower. So really good for creating harmonies. And these flowers are very attractive to hummingbirds. So if you want hummers in your garden, this is a great one to include. Annual phlox. This is another very underused flower. So anytime I get a client who says that they want to do something in their garden, but they're sick of begonias and they're sick of impatiens and they're sick of pentas, I say, get some phlox. Phlox is a Florida native, and it is very attractive to Gulf fritillary butterflies as a nectar plant. Comes in a lot of different colors. The common one, the most common color, excuse me, is this kind of like this violet sort of purplish color, but it also comes in pink and red and white and peach. Very, very long lasting for two reasons. Number one, the flowers themselves tend to be long lasting. So if you plant this around November, usually it'll last at least until May, sometimes until June of the following year. So that's like 8 months of color from one plant. And the other nice thing about it is this one will self-sow. So as the flowers go through their cycle and die off, they will create new seedling plants. So you'll sort of get your own little colony going. Again, this is another one I can't say enough nice things about. Really underused, especially if you're looking for something other than the begonias and the impatiens that everyone does. This is a great one to use. Coral nymph salvia is a pink variety of our native scarlet sage, but I have heard some people say that scarlet sage is actually not a native, it's from Mexico. So the jury is a little bit out on that, but regardless of whether or not it's native, it's definitely gorgeous, very attractive to butterflies, bees, and songbirds. I believe goldfinches eat the seeds. So this is really kind of like an amazing plant to use for wildlife attractants. And the color of the flower is one of these colors that plays really, really well with a lot of other colors. It'll self-sow in your garden, but the unwanted seedlings, if you get too many, you can just pull them up and transplant them, or you can just put them in the compost pile. Rosemary, common cooking herb, also makes a beautiful garden plant. Again, this is another one with grayish foliage. That's going to be one of these things that plays well with others. And you can see the habit of the plant. It actually looks sort of like a vertical brushstroke of color coming up from the ground. So this is definitely one to use for that arts and crafts style look. And last but not least, the meteor shower variety of verbena. This is actually a really common plant over in England. I visited England for the first time about 4 years ago, and this plant is used everywhere over there in gardens. But it actually does really well in South Florida, especially in our cool season. You can see in the picture, it's got these kind of pale purple flowers, and even though it's very upright and stiff, it's got a really nice opacity to it. So this is a plant where you can plant it in front of other things and you'll still be able to sort of see through it. Like you can see in the picture, you can clearly see the boulders behind it. So really cool for creating those sort of textural gradients in a garden. And I have found that butterflies, especially Gulf fritillaries, really like to feed on these flowers. So this is another great butterfly plant. For anyone who's interested in reading up more on Gertrude, these are all the sources that I used to create this presentation. I'll pause for a minute in case anyone wants to take a picture of these or jot them down. And if anyone is interested in contacting me, if you're interested in a landscape or garden consultation, if you're looking for design work for your yard, or if you're interested in updates about my upcoming book on roses for South Florida, this is my contact information right here. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, I'm pretty active on, and also my personal website and my cell phone. And thank you for everyone that's in attendance. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation and found it interesting and informative. Thank you so much.
Victor, thank you. I have just a few questions. One came up is, can you recommend a local nursery to purchase the flowers?
Absolutely. Excuse me, let me get some water. Yes, absolutely. So I'll just run through the nurseries where I get all of my stuff.
Okay.
So Lowe's and Home Depot, even the Walmart Garden Center, a little ashamed to admit it, but sometimes you can find some really cool stuff there. In addition to that, let's see, New Turf and Pompano. So that's the letters NU and then turf, all one word. New Turf and Pompano Beach, wonderful nursery. They have really good prices on their stuff and they usually have a really good selection. Living Color in, that's off of Griffin Road in Fort Lauderdale or Plantation, whatever that area is. Living Color is great. I found that sometimes they can be honestly a little bit pricey, but on the plus side, they, just like New Turf, they usually have a really nice selection of things, especially this time of year, the herbaceous material. Usually they're gonna have a ton of stuff that you can use for your garden. Let's see what else. Flamingo Road Garden, that's going to be out in Sunrise, so a little bit of a drive from eastern Fort Lauderdale, but that's a great one also. Another one that has a good selection and pretty good prices for the most part. And there's a couple for people, I'm assuming that there may be a lot of people here that are mostly in Fort Lauderdale, since this is the Equality Park Garden Club. If you are, if you're amenable to making a trip down to Miami, there's a bunch of nurseries down there. This will, I'll kind of give everyone my little trade secret. There are several nurseries that are wholesalers, but they sell retail to pretty much anybody that walks in. So you can get a plant that's $10 or $12 at Lowe's or Home Depot. You can get for $4 or $5 at these nurseries. There's 4 of them in particular. So if everyone out there watching, listening, if you want to jot these down, these are all in I guess it would be like South Miami or Kendall, whatever that area is. Not quite the Redlands, a little bit north of that. They're all off of Sunset. So this is Southwest 72nd Street. The first one is called Placencia Nursery. So that's Placensia, Placencia Nursery. Second one is called Margarita's Gardens. So standard spelling of margarita, like the drink. Third one is called Ileguas. That's going to be E-L-E-G-U-A. And the last one is called Action Sod. All of them, again, they sell retail, but at wholesale prices. So if you're looking to stock up and get a ton of stuff on the cheap, those are the places to go. Again, downside is it's in Miami, so it's going to be a little bit of a drive. Personally, I think it's worth it. I probably saved thousands of dollars over the years by buying from those nurseries. Any other questions?
Yeah, one just popped up. Can you repeat the name of the first place you mentioned? And I believe that was in Miami.
Yeah.
Action Side.
Yeah. So there's 4. I'll go over them again. The first one.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. No problem. First one is called Placencia Nursery, and I believe it's spelled Placensia. Placencia. And if you just type this in your smartphone, if you go to your maps and type Placencia Nursery Miami, it should come up. It should be off of Southwest 72nd Street. Second one is called Margarita's Gardens. Third one is called Elegua, Elegua. And the last one is called Action Sod. And again, all of them are wholesalers, but they sell retail to the public.
Okay, great. One of the attendees had asked, it was the one before New Turf. And don't know if, oh my gosh.
Let's see. There was New Turf, Living Color. Yeah.
Flamingo Garden.
Flamingo Road.
Right.
And those are all in Broward.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, sure.
Victor, outside of Munstead Wood, and if you were going to England, where would you find an example of Gertrude Jekyll's Victorian type gardens? Is there something like in Holland you have Keukenhof? Okay, so something like that you would find in England. There's someone was going to travel there.
The big one that comes to mind is Kew Gardens, Kew. They have, there's at least 1 or 2 sections of that garden I can think of that are sort of done in the Gertrude Jekyll style. Beyond that, that's actually, I think I mentioned I've been giving this presentation for probably about 4 or 5 years now. This is actually the first time I've gotten this particular question, which is a great one. Yes, there are other examples of her work in England. That's actually a great thought for the future. I will compile a list of those and have those for the next presentation. But I can get a list because I have like 3 or 4 different books on Gertrude Jekyll that are in my library, which is actually behind me, but you can't see it because of the colorful background that I put on for this presentation. But I could research those and get those for the person asking that question, definitely.
Okay.
So yes, there are examples in England.
Okay, excellent. Victor, I have no more questions. I cannot tell you, and I can see why 3 years ago when you presented this, that you had such a high rating. This has just been outstanding and very informative. Yeah, I took some notes. One, I'll never forget. Well, first of all, congratulations on having your book published in 2021. That is fantastic. That's huge.
Yeah, me and my partner are so excited for this.
I would be too. Yeah,
thank you for that.
And I'm going to tell my partner, I love this idea. Never put a $20 plant in a 50-cent hole. Thou will nail that. You nailed it.
Right. I'm telling you, I started working at, again, the name of it is called the Benke. It's a German word, Behnke, the Benke Nursery Company. I was 19 years old when I started working there on weekends when I was in college. And I noticed they had that on one of the signs in the front of the nursery. And I was like, I never thought of it before that way, but that makes perfect sense. Like, why would you spend all this money on, these expensive plants and not take time to amend the soil that they're actually going to be living in? Because this is like their home, so it makes perfect sense when you think about it. But I think a lot of us, not intentionally, but we get so excited about like the buying of the plants and then the creating of the garden that sometimes we forget about the ecology of gardening, the other side of it, the more scientific side, like how plants actually grow and what they need to do well.
Correct. I noticed, of course, there are some plants like the Queen Anne's lace that attracts butterflies.
Yeah.
So in the Gertrude Jekyll gardens, would that not also be a butterfly mecca?
Oh, I'm sure. I don't know much about the what am I trying to say? The ecology of England, what butterfly species butterfly species, excuse me, they have there. But yeah, absolutely. Her garden would have been like a butterfly magnet. She used tons of stuff that I know, like salvias, for example, are really attractive to bees and butterflies. She uses those all the times in her garden. So I'm sure probably.
I would assume in your garden here in Oakland Park, you have butterflies galore.
Oh my God. You know, and I'll say this, I did not plan my garden as a butterfly garden. I planned it primarily as an artistic thing first and a environmental thing second. But the plants that I used, yeah, every single day when I would wake up and sip my morning coffee protein shake, so, you know, 7:30, 8 a.m., I would look out in the backyard and there would be easily 20 or 30 butterflies, all different species, monarchs especially, lots of Gulf fritillaries, lots of zebra longwings, giant swallowtails. I don't remember the name of it, but those little ones that are like a bright yellowish green color, whatever those ones are. Every single day they would just be out there doing their butterfly dance. So yeah, kind of like I said, I didn't plan the garden as a butterfly garden. It just kind of turned into one over time, but I'm not complaining. It was wonderful.
Great, great. Victor, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I have no more questions. We thoroughly enjoyed this.
I thoroughly enjoyed being here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you.
Sure.
At this time, I'd like to turn this back over to our Vice President of Membership, Linda Gordon, who will provide the results from our recent poll. Linda?
Oh, Victor, you know, this is the second or third time I've heard you speak, and every time I get something else out of it, and you just really do gardening a huge favor by giving your presentations.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to hear that.
Anyway, of course, there wasn't really much to our election because we were all running unopposed, but the slate for the coming 2 years will be Van Gosselin as president. Vice president of programming will be Paul Durbin. Vice president for membership will be myself, Linda Gordon. Secretary will continue to be Pat Elson. Treasurer will be Mario Rios. Our first trustee is Ruthie Roulette. And the second trustee is Chuck Nichols. Congratulations to you all. And we will continue to try to do our best to keep the garden club going during the pandemic when we can't really meet. I hope you all have been enjoying, you know, the Zoom meetings. You know, at least we can continue to learn, even if we can't trade plants at the plant raffles. You know, we're all looking forward to getting back to Hagen Park. Hopefully that will be soon into the new year. And we've also got the tropical plant fair that we're hopefully going to be able to do the first week in March. Anyway, that's the results of our election. I want to turn this back over to Van for his closing remarks. And I thank you all for attending tonight. Bye.
And good evening again. I can't say any more than what's already been said. Thank you so much, Victor. Very, very interesting. I really enjoyed it. I got a bit of a cramp in my hand though, writing all those notes down. And then I remembered, oh, that's right, we're recording this. So I'm going to go back at my leisure and look some more of it. But very informative. And like Linda said, that's the second time I've heard you speak about gardening, and I find it extremely informative. Thank you, Linda. Very unusual election for us. Thanks for conducting it for us. Excuse me. Excuse me. I guess everything is going along. The holiday seasons are coming on in. I'm going to mention this in the next upcoming newsletter, but I'll give you a heads up. There's a thing called Amazon Smile. And if you shop on Amazon, which I'm sure a number of you do, if you join that Amazon Smile and make the Equality Garden Club a beneficiary, then a very small percentage of their profits are sent over to us, and it would really help us a lot. So if you want to give a Christmas or a Hanukkah gift to our club, it'd be most appreciated, I assure you. I'm not going to go and tarry any longer. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And we'll see you soon again. And hopefully, and soon, we'll do it in person. Until then, stay happy and stay healthy. And I think what I'll do now is call this meeting to an end and let you all enjoy the rest of the evening at home. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.